Hello and welcome to the third episode of the KurosawaCast. My name is Robert Beams and joining me as ever is Craig Ennis.
Hello. I had to quickly get changed before we started today, Rob. I realised that I was probably wearing the same T-shirt that I'd worn in the other two episodes, so I had to check the YouTube, and indeed, yes, I was wearing exactly the same T-shirt. So, I mean, I probably shouldn't have said anything. No one would have known. But
well, at
yeah.
least we've got that cleared up. You do have multiple T-shirts. It's canon. So yeah, if this is your first time tuning in, which is likely, we're just getting off the ground. This is our third episode looking at Kurosawa's fifth and sixth films. No Regrets for Our Youth from 1946 and One Wonderful Sunday from 1947. The kind of the gimmick of the whole thing is basically that I'm a long time Kurosawa kind of fan. And Craig, filmmaker, film teacher, never previously seen any Kurosawa films, so we're sort of going through it together.
Yeah, this is my mea culpa. And just to clear up, this isn't the third time we've gone through films 5 and 6. If you go back and listen to the other episodes, you'll hear about films 1, 2, 3, and 4. Yeah. So we're not going to be going over the same two films every episode.
No, it's not like that podcast where they watch Paul Blart Mall Cop 2 or over and over again. Right. Okay. So No Regrets for Our Youth. Let's start there. Like I say, 1946. This was the first films we covered were various shades of propaganda, one way or another. Even the ones that were less overtly propagandistic had propagandistic elements, or the fact that it was during the war sort of coloured the subject matter that was being covered towards more sort of feudal things or traditional Japanese things. This is kind of the post-war. The post-war kind of apologia, really, isn't it? And it starts off actually with a kind of a not a disclaimer, but a bit of context saying that this is about this famous incident. I think it's called the Takigawa incident, which was this protests at the Kyoto University where these radical intellectuals or these kind of leftists were basically silenced, and a high-ranking professor was made to resign basically over the fact that of sharing particular kind of leftist views. And this film sets itself up from the off to be talking about the creeping towards nationalism and militarism of the 30s in Japan. It starts off in 1933. What were your sort of thoughts coming into this one? What did you know about it already? And
I just read the synopsis on the BFI player, which is where I watched it, and it didn't give a hell of a lot away. To me, this sounded like it was going to be some sort of William Wyler style melodrama. And in a lot of ways, I think that sums it up quite nicely. Actually, I think it is that sort of it's very much feels like prestige drama, the sort of thing that you could imagine. You could imagine this being a Oscar contender in the late 90s, early 2000s kind of thing. It's and I don't mean that in any way as a slight. I was expecting it to be. I wasn't expecting it to have like quite a bigger time span as it did, because it's got the story's told over about 15 years or so, isn't it?
Yeah, something like that. It starts in 33 and it ends post-war, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I wasn't quite expecting it's this kind of. I mean, it's really well titled because it starts with a bunch of kids who are at university or just starting university or sort of young, carefree. War happens, and over the course of the film, they grow up, get jobs, grow apart, grow together. Their lives and their ambitions take them in different ways, and then it kind of focuses in on the story really of the one woman in this group of friends, doesn't it? And it becomes her story, really.
It does, yeah. That's Setsuko Hara, who some listeners may know from being the main character in most of the classic Ozu movies. So she's the principal kind of protagonist in Early Summer and Tokyo Story and lots of that sort of Ozu oeuvre. She's a really interesting figure in her own right. But yeah, the other two people as well. And in fact, lots of faces. You're probably starting to recognize people as well, right? Because you've got. I actually wrote his name down this time because I didn't actually say it in the first few podcasts. But you've got Susumu Fujita, who is Sanshiro Sugata in those films, and he plays the kind of the more idealist, kind of radical of the two guys. And then the other actor, Akitaki Kono, he was also in all the previous films as well, but in much smaller roles. I think in Tiger's Tail was probably his most prominent. I think he was the mustachioed guy trying to sort of stop them at the border, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, you get Takashi Shimura in this again, another small role for him, but he's going to become very important later on in lots of the later films. And I really, really like, I won't sort of jump the gun too much. I really like Takashi Shimura in this film. He played like a, like a policeman or something, or a detective or something. And he's normally such kind of affable guys. Like he's normally like kind of very fatherly figures or nice noble leaders or something like that, or when he's the lead in Akiru, he's the kind of the guy that kind of pulls on your heartstrings, whereas here he was in kind of bastard mode, and I quite enjoyed watching that as well. He's a really good character actor anyway. But yeah, I want to say, because normally I talk a bit as well about some of the context of the film, and I go through things. For example, one of the sources I cite a lot is something like an autobiography, Kurosawa's autobiography. I don't have any Kurosawa as Alan Partridge quotes for us this time, because it's a relatively somber part of the autobiography, because it deals kind of immediately post-war. And he had some really interesting things to say about this period. What's particularly interesting was he kind of starts talking about No Regrets for Our Youth in his autobiography with a bit of an apology for the war, and talks about how this is what he wrote. I offered no resistance to Japan's militarism. Unfortunately, I have to admit, I did not have the courage to resist in any positive way, and I got by ingratiating myself when necessary and otherwise evading censure. I am ashamed of this, but I must be honest about it. And then he goes on to write, the freedom and democracy of the post-war era were not things I fought for and won. They were granted to me by powers beyond my control. As a result, I thought it was all the more essential for me to approach them with an earnest and humble desire to learn and to make them my own. And it's interesting because you can look at this film in some way, because there's the kind of the peasant characters later on in the movie. We'll talk about it in more detail. But there are people kind of later on in the movie that treat the family of someone who's accused of being a leftist, accused of being a spy, very, very badly. And you can look at it in one way of Kurosawa jabbing those people in the eye and saying, yeah, look at you lot who allowed this militarism, you lot who called people spies, or who. But actually, if you put it in the context of his comments here, Kurosawa's very much kind of, if not one of those people, he certainly wasn't standing up against them. And it's kind of puts it in, again, this word will come over and over again with Kurosawa's kind of humanist mode, where he's not really judging anyone in the story. And in fact, he probably feels he's holding up the people who did actually say something and did stick to their principles, but he's not counting himself among them in any kind of high-handed way.
I mean, that's what made me think of Oscar prestige films. Like if you were to compare it, it's got a similar narrative to something like, let's say, The Imitation Game. So you've got maybe that's a clumsy comparison, but it's the idea of there is this person who's is it Nogi? Yeah. So he's the kind of the radical thinking student who becomes a radical thinking academic who is accused of spying against the Japanese government and is executed for it. Spoiler alert. And then eventually is eventually is held as a hero after his death. So that kind of unsung hero, or that ill-treated hero narrative that you get in a lot of those prestige history drama films. That's what that's in here, isn't it? That very, very much so.
There's something that you don't get, because I watched this with my mother-in-law's staying with us at the moment for Christmas, and she's not a cinephile particularly. She's not particularly, like, she's never seen a Kurosawa film or anything like that. She watched this because I had to watch it for the podcast last night, and she was really disappointed with the fact that the people who are who damage the crops and have a go at Nogi's family and stuff as being spies and graffiti their house and laugh at her in the street and all of this, they never get their comeuppance, right? There's never a moment of catharsis for that, really. There's a tiny bit at the end where they sort of bow to her and everything, but it's not really explicit. There's not like one antagonist in the village who is, if it was the Hollywood traditional movie you'd see now, there'd be like one guy in the village who was like especially nasty, and he'd get a pie in his face or he'd get arrested or something at the end. And it was quite interesting that, because I agree with what you're saying, but what's quite interesting as well is that you don't get that sort of catharsis or that sort of let off from it that you might get in that kind of modern prestige film, I don't think.
No, and I found it really interesting that there was some. There's a lot of farming in the last act of this film, and I've been watching a lot of silent cinema during the lockdown, particularly Soviet silent cinema, and they love a tractor in Soviet silent cinema, and there is a lot of parallels in the way that the visual storytelling's done. Actually, there's some the student protests early in the film look a lot like the scenes from Potemkin and Strike. Like, it's just the same screen direction, stairs, feet, marching. It's too close not to be directly influenced by it when you watch it. Like, there is definite influence being taken from there, I think. So it's not but it's, although there is parallels with the story and the subject matter with sort of Western prestige cinema, obviously there is, like you say, more interesting things going on. There isn't that comeuppance for the for the villagers who treat her badly or anything like that, or the alternative love interest, because obviously this sparks from. It's quite interesting the way that the narrative jumps between very similar narrative arcs. The kind of starting with the rite of passage and then going into the love triangle, the safe boring guy and the exciting dangerous guy, and then the story about the kind of shunned woman who's going to make it on her own, even when her own family don't seem to want her there.
Yeah, as well. I got real kind of Gone with the Wind vibes from that. I can't remember what year Gone with the Wind came out.
I've never seen Gone with the Wind.
Gone with the Wind has this the best bit in Gone with the Wind. The best bit in Gone with the Wind you can probably just watch on YouTube is like it's one of those films that has an interval, and at the end of Act 1 of Gone with the Wind, before the interval, the main character, whose name I've forgotten, she has that big scene where she shouts at the sky and it's really dramatic, and she's sort of. But my point is more that it's this woman who has come out of the other side of something kind of really bad and is now going to kind of dig her hands into the earth and sort of build herself back up. And I kind of got that from it. It's not got any similarity to Gone with the Wind outside of that. It's just something that Scarlet O'Hara sort of came into my head there. But no, to give it context for people who've not seen it, and you've probably watched the films if you're listening to this, otherwise it's probably a bit shit. But the basic thing is that after her husband, the one she does marry, who's the radical guy, after he dies, she feels bad for his parents, who are these rural people who kind of live out in the middle of nowhere. Her dead husband hadn't seen them for the last 10 years either. And they've kind of, I don't know if they've disowned him, but he's kind of not connected with them at all. But she feels bad for them, and she wants to kind of do something for them and make sure they're okay, and I guess maintain some kind of link to her dead husband. So she travels out to where they are and finds that they're living just in squalor, basically. and then she helps them plant their rice crop and kind of build
farming by night so they don't get seen.
Yeah, and exactly, and like they crop the whole field. They do the whole field, and then like the next day it's all been sabotaged. There are signs in the earth saying that they're traitors and spies and all this. What's really interesting to go back to sort of the context side of it is that Kurosawa, as is the case with a lot of his earlier films, Kurosawa didn't really get his own way making this, and he's quite bitter about some of its production and things he wanted to do differently in ways that were interfered. In this case, the story is that he originally, I think, reading between the lines, I think the film was supposed to be more about the Susumu Fujita character, I think, because he talks about how there was a superficial similarity between the film he was making and the film the studio are making with another young actor, the young director. And he had to change his script because they thought the two films were too similar. And the part of his script, and he thinks the script he ended up making is less good than the original script. He talks about how the original script was more of an account of this guy who died in prison and all of that aspect. And the whole
because a lot of that happens off screen, doesn't it? Really,
exactly. And the second half of the movie is the stuff that he rewrote that he doesn't like as much. Is the stuff with Setsuko Hara and the farming. And the thing that's interesting to me about this is that the first half of this film, there's interesting things there for sure. There's some interesting techniques. There's some interesting stuff that we'll talk about in there. But the second half of the film for me is one of the strongest pieces of filmmaking from him in his whole oeuvre. Like watching it yesterday, I was really struck by the sequence when she gets to the farm and she goes to the village. The way that he's very good as a rule. We saw this in The Most Beautiful. He's very good at depicting time passing. He's very good at depicting people getting tired, people getting exhausted, like extremely just knackered. And you get Setsuko Hara, who's obviously a beautiful movie star actress. She very quickly starts being like really like not just worn down, like her skin and everything. She's just obviously been toiling in the earth, like really hard. And you see this backbreaking labor and you feel the time it's taken. And you have this amazing sequence, I thought, where she walks to the village to go get the, I guess the seeds or whatever it is to plant the rice crop. And you really get a sense of how long this thing goes on for, but the cutting it does between all the people's reactions to her, the scorn they're showing her, people laughing at her. Yeah, I loved all that stuff. And particularly there's that sequence when she's really tired and she starts kind of being unable to walk and she's falling to her knees, and it keeps cutting to the trees and the wind blowing in them and laughter, like not only the villagers laughing at her, but like the whole world is mocking her, like the whole the elements are laughing at her. She's being mocked by everything. And I just thought it was such a powerful sequence.
I thought, yeah, I mean, I thought from the off, like this film is really, really stylistic and inventive with its storytelling from the off. Like there's this real great sense of energy right at the beginning where they're all they're out having this picnic. It starts with these young people having a picnic and having a lovely day, and they all decide to run up this hill, and it's all these really close profile shots of people running, and it cuts between them and they're kind of facing that way, and you get this incredible sense of movement. And it's almost I kind of like I've seen it reminded me of it's the amount of dynamism that's put into that and the kind of the force of that action. It reminded me of a lot of anime that I've seen where you often see people moving on the screen
against like a blurred background, like a
and match cutting and it's kind of like it's just this full force of youth being thrown at you right from the start.
I'm really glad you brought up that bit because I'm not going to talk too much about it now, but kind of bookmark it in your mind because you're going to see that particular thing come up again and again and again. Like Seven Samurai has loads of bits where it cuts between people in that same way. Would you call that a close-up, or is that more of like a medium shot of a person?
In my head, it's very close, but
yeah, it was kind of from the waist up. But it's of these people where they're medium, the full frame and they are running. And the background is like grass or trees or whatever, and it's kind of blurred as they're kind of running, and you get those quick cuts between the people running the same direction. You will see this again and again in his films.
And there was some other match cutting as well that was really nice. There's cutting from grass into water that reminded me a bit of that famous cut from Stoker.
The hair to the grass,
the hair to the grass, like, you know, the style and the understanding of the visual language is like really apparent from the off here. There's a really, really nice scene as well where she's getting it, like you said, they're moving through time, but she finds out where I'm getting names mixed up. Nogi's offices where he's working, and she's kind of wandering the streets outside the building, trying to build up the courage to go in and speak to him. And it's kind of, you get this sense that this is a recurring thing, and time is passing and she can't quite pull herself to go in. And
is it when she learns about his death that you get that really expressionistic quick cut of like her in several really melodramatic
mugshot?
Yeah,
the mugshot that looks like something from Hot Fuzz or something like that. It cuts from her straight on to the side, and my interpretation was that these were police photographs.
Yeah, no, but not that bit. That bit's cool as well, the mugshot. But the bit where she's behind the door and her mum comes to the door to like see if she's okay, and she's suddenly like, yeah.
That's the bit that sequence is a repeat from earlier in the film where they're having a party, and she runs up out of like embarrassment and shyness to sort of, because she's in love with the guy, and she runs upstairs and kind of hides in her room. I can't remember if he wants to speak to her and she's embarrassed, or he's gone somewhere and she's heartbroken, but she runs up, and it's framed in exactly the same way, and there's this lovely little echo of that moment after he dies where she runs up into a childhood bedroom.
She's behind the door and she does these very stylistic poses where she's like really melodramatic, like she's suddenly like this and this and this, and she's just stretching her arms out in all these weird ways, and it all takes place because the mum is on the other side of the door for presumably only a couple of seconds, but it's edited as though she's been really stewing in this anguish behind the door for eternity in these
exactly, because then it's kind of like, it's almost, by cutting back to the mother, it almost undercuts how long that she's been there.
Well, yeah, but what it makes it is an expressionistic thing of it's stylistically how she feels in the moment, rather than being a literal thing of what she was doing on the other side of the door, which I think makes sense, because if it was literally what she was doing on the other side of the door, it's so melodramatic, that moment.
I did also put a little note in here that I was really hoping for a moment that we were going to get a courtroom drama for a little bit. Because the way the film was going and hopping between narratives, it was really quite compelling. And like, you're like, oh, this is keeping me on my toes. You know, when you look back on it at the end, you know, it's not a predictable story, but it is a reasonably kind of retold story. But it does keep you on your toes, guessing as to where you're going to end up in the moment, in the telling. And I think that's a real strength of the film, and that's probably the case with most things that you watch, not knowing where they're going. When you come to them and look back on them, you go, oh, it's one of those stories. But certainly with this, I was for a moment, I thought we were going to get courtroom drama, and I was really quite excited by that, because I really like, one of the things that I really like is watching courtroom drama set in other countries where they have a different procedure to their courts. But anyway, let's move on from
from your courtroom wants. Another couple of bits I want to mention. I don't know if they stood out to you. When she goes to talk to Nogi in his office, and there's that scene where he's talking to her back's turned to him, we're looking at her back, and we're seeing him as a shadow on the wall. I thought that was really striking. And there's another bit I wanted, sorry, if you're so to say on that one.
Back turned and shadow.
Nice. And then the other one I really liked was that like dolly shot of when she's in prison, and it follows the legs of a guard, and it kind of, he walks down the hall past all these jail cells, and then it kind of lands on her looking really kind of grotty in prison, and then kind of pans back. That's another great sequence where you get tiredness and time and everything when she's being in those cells, because you kind of see the changes in her. And there's a really nice bookending of the first scene where she's being interrogated by Takashi Shimura and a couple of other guys. And you see Takashi Shimura in this really nice, intense close-up. I don't think you see anyone else in that kind of close-up in the whole movie. And then you get this progression of her being there for a while, and that dolly shot and other bits of her there. And then you go back to that same room with those people, but now she's like really beaten down. I thought that was another really great way to show the progression of time and everything like that.
No, I just, throughout it, I found this film really engaging and surprising and inventive in a lot of ways. When did I watch this? I think I might have watched this last Saturday. And I watched Mank that evening as well. And I was thinking about, it's difficult to tell. I'm no expert as is the conceit of the show in Japanese cinema, or particularly in films of the 40s. But it did seem like there was a lot of invention in this film, in terms of there must be stuff that he was doing here that he wasn't copying from elsewhere. There were things that were being developed to tell the story in this way. And as I was watching Mank, I was thinking about it in those sorts of terms of inventing and developing that language of cinema. This looked like a pioneering. It's a quantum leap, even from, well, certainly from Tiger's Tale, but like even from Most Beautiful, which is a nice, well put together film. But this is really, really like strongly thought about in terms of everything: framing, movement, lighting, editing. It's all starting to come together in this, I feel.
I agree. It's interesting that you compared this in some way to William Wyler, or your expectations being like a William Wyler film, because in the course of the reading I was doing around this film, I found a quote about how his favorite directors were often reported as being John Ford, famously, but then William Wyler and Frank Capra. And what's really interesting about that, as a transition to One Wonderful Sunday, is that if this is like a Wyler movie in some ways, One Wonderful Sunday feels like Frank Capra. I mean, that's
absolutely.
The title of it evokes a kind of certain Capra-esqueness. But
I don't know if that's just because we're so close. I don't know if that's just because we're so close to Christmas as well. But I was getting strong "It's a Wonderful Life" vibes from this film all throughout.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not doing a very good job so far of setting the films up before we discuss them. So should we do a little
go ahead. Talk about what One Wonderful Sunday is. This one's from 1947.
Yeah, so One Wonderful Sunday is about a Sunday, and it's about a young couple who are engaged, both working, who only can see each other on Sundays, both working in jobs that aren't paying a lot, and sort of dreaming about being able to get married and afford to buy a place together, and open a business and start their lives together and raise a family. They're sort of dreaming about this, but the reality being that they've only got 35 yen in their pocket to have their date. So
I
they
just want to say about that I love, I love bottle movies. Like I love like movies in one room or with a few actors or whatever. This isn't that, but I love the fact that the stakes are established from the beginning. It's very small, very like, this is the amount of money we have, and that's consistent through the movie. We've got 35 yen and we've got one day, and the whole movie takes place with 35 yen in their pocket on that one day. And I love stuff like that. But sorry, carry on.
Yeah, and they just kind of wander through the streets of Tokyo, doing whatever they can that doesn't cost any money, bouncing from moment to moment, adventure to adventure, low stakes adventure, and just sort of dreaming through their day a little bit. I didn't write any notes really for this. I watched this today, and I've been finding that writing the notes has been taking me out of the movies a little bit. So I haven't got any notes. I've got some notes, but not many.
What I kind of think about it quite strongly coming through was because I watched them back to back more or less last night. And I felt that as strong as the entirety of No Regrets for Our Youth is, for me, the second half is transcendent. And then I found with One Wonderful Sunday the reverse to be true. Like, I like a lot of the kind of magical realism and the invention that goes on in the second half of it, but the first kind of hour or 40 minutes of One Wonderful Sunday is such a like, not a thrill ride, but it's just such a joy. But it's like it's so charming, it's so light, it's so funny. And the thing is, you asked me in the previous episode if humor was something that came up in Kurosawa much in the future, and I said no, it's not really. His films aren't funny. But the first half of this movie, when I saw it again yesterday, I was laughing loads of times because, again, one of the ways it's Capra-esque is that they keep bumping into all these kind of weird, in the Frank Capra films, if there's a trial or something, there'll be some funny old lady who's a witness, and she'll have like a funny way of speaking, or she'll say some daft thing, or she'll have a funny dog or something. Every character they came across was this archetype, was this strange, like from the gangster and his missus who turned up with the rich people with all the gifts and stuff when they're viewing the house, when they go and view that squalor apartment, the squalid place, and the guy who's like at the desk there in charge of like
you don't want to to be honest, you'll get typhus in the summer, you get rheumatism in the winter. And all you can see is the toilets from the factory next door.
He's like the old the Four Yorkshiremen Monty Python sort of thing, but like one-upping himself about just how bad this place is. And it's clearly played for humor. And his boss, who's like the landlord or the guy who actually owns it, he keeps slagging him off, and then the guy will come in and look at him, and he'll have to pretend to be selling the place properly. And that scene's funny. And then he goes into the cabaret place, and there's kind of funny characters giving him looks when he's at the desk. And then he goes downstairs. There's comedy interactions with a kind of I don't know if he's a con man or a low-ranking Yakuza guy or something who's just like taking advantage of free drinks and eating stuff from the bins. But there's all these like comedy characters in it as well that felt to me really Capra-esque, and all of it with a kind of a warmth to it as well. There was obviously tragedy to it, and there was a lot of sadness to it. There was a warmth to it. The sequence where he's playing baseball in the street with those kids,
knocks the kid over, it makes him cry, and
but then the man comes out and shouts because he hits the ball through a sign, and he's shouting at the kids. But then it's very Chaplin-esque as well, this bit where the guy's having to go at the kids, but then our hero walks over towards him with the baseball bat, and the owner starts pretending like, oh, it wasn't a big deal. I'm not actually having to go at anyone.
And then sells him the damaged buns that have been hit by the baseball at knockdown price.
Yeah, exactly.
So they get their lunch. It's really, really lovely. Like, they go through. There's this weird. There's a strange dynamic that runs through it, and this kind of the narrative thrust of the film is obviously they are talking about it, but the narrative thrust, and going back to Capra, the main character, the main guy is kind of like George Bailey, if George Bailey hadn't gone home to find everybody bringing in money to bail him out, and it just kind of, it was a few months later, it wasn't Christmas, and he was just miserable at the state of his life. So he kind of wanders around, and then his fiance is this very upbeat, perky kind of almost proto kind of she's got a kind of there's a sort of a early manic pixie dream girl thing where she's kind of like, they go and see this house, and she's the
one boosting him up, and
she's pantomiming where everything is, and kind of this kind of making dinner and all that kind of stuff. And she's this irrepressible bundle of enthusiasm for him for the most part, but he's just constantly like he's constantly got this kind of 16-year-old goth at a family party kind of sulk on throughout the beginning of the film. But the narrative tension is about them kind of meeting back at a place where they can both be happy in each other's company, even for a little bit of time. And that's really nice.
But the objective, at least in the small scale sense, there's a broader thing going on with their lives in post-war Japan. But in a short-term sense, the objective is to try and have a wonderful Sunday, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's kind of the objective of the movie.
On 35 yen, which is kind of also works as a kind of it almost works as a ticking clock as well, because as they spend the money, that the day's running out as well. Which is quite.
It reminds me, a thing I want to say, just because it doesn't really have any relevance to anything else, so I just want to get it out there as kind of a trivia thing, really, is have you seen the Ealing film Hue and Cry? It's like 1946. Well, there's an evening comedy called Hue and Cry that the most famous thing about it is it was all shot on the ruins of London post-Blitz. And you have all these sequences where these kids are playing on bomb sites, which is something kids did, obviously, in the 40s and 50s, playing on bomb sites. And I love the fact as well, this was sort of like, it couldn't have even necessarily been that Kurosawa had seen Hue and Cry because, you know, it's coming out basically at the same time. But you get a lot of that in this movie where he shoots, like when the kids are playing baseball, that's around rubble and ruins. There's a really lovely sequence that I think is beautiful later in the film where they have a bit of a shit experience in a cafe. And then they go to a knockdown bomb site area and they start miming, like pantomiming, making it a cafe. And they have this kind of cute scene there, which I think is really lovely. But I really love that thing of it being shot. I think a lot of post-war Italian, like neo-realist films as well, used bomb sites and the kind of ruins of the kind of cities. But I thought that was a beautiful touch in this. I really loved that. And actually, just to go into the kind of production side of the film a little bit.
There's also there's some other really nice. There's a strange little sequence at a zoo where it becomes like where it's almost like they haven't actually taken the actors into the zoo. You just see close-ups of different animals and they do a little voiceover on the top of them.
It reminded me almost of like, you know, there's a certain strand of like Bugs Bunny cartoons where there'll just be that guy doing that voiceover. And, you know, it was kind of like that. And what I loved was everything they were saying about the animals. It reminded me, like the first date I went on with my wife was at an aquarium. And it's because it's a very easy place to go on a date to a zoo or an aquarium because you've got stuff to sort of talk about and joke about. And so it's very relatable, this experience of them walking around the zoo and they're kind of joking and having fun about looking at these animals. But also what's very clever in the script, and it's not subtle, but I still thought it was clever, was the way they relate all of these things, all of these jokes to talking about post-war Japan and the problems that are going on. So they're having a laugh about them and they'll say, oh, look, there's a pig in the lion's cage because obviously they've got no lions, so it's a shit zoo. But also, and that's kind of funny, but then he'll be like, look, and he's fat, like the pig's getting fat off the black market, you know, and they'll laugh about that. Or they were kind of likening everything to the troubles that are going on in post-war Japan, which I thought was a really interesting sequence.
And there's some other lovely bits as well, really well observed bits, like when they're walking down the street, you've got the photographers who are vying to take their photograph and try and they were selling. It seemed like they were selling them Polaroids almost. I don't know how that those particular cameras worked, but like there's this idea. It's a bit like when you're walking past. We get a lot of people on Brighton Seafront wearing costumes who want to come up and like Darth Vader, and they'll put a lightsaber up to your neck and they go, take a photo, and you're like, no, I don't want to take a photo. I'm not giving you a $5 for this. I'm not interested, thanks. And that kind of they kind of might want the photograph because they're having a nice time together, but at the same time they've got only a limited amount of money, so they're just trying to not meet the eyes of the photographers, which is really nice. And then there's just really good. It just bounces around. It's a bit like a. I was thinking about it. They mentioned before Sunrise in the BFI blurb, and it is a bit. There is something very Linklater and Dazed and Confused and Before Sunrise, and that kind of hangout film vibe about it, which is really, really nice. And then some of the things that they go down are quite fun as well. You go on these really nice little diversions. He goes in to talk to an old army buddy who runs a cabaret, and he's wearing shabby clothes, and it's a really well-to-do place, so that the people who work there don't want him to hang around. They assume he's some sort of gangster, and they take him down the stairs and into the basement in this shot that kind of looks like the Copacabana in Goodfellas. And he gets sat next to a bar next to a gangster who starts talking to him and like very quickly just sizes him up as not a criminal at all. And it's just really kind of, it's these little diversions that kind of just propel the film along really, really nicely, and kind of reveal so much about what's going on and who's making money and where money's being made. The bit where they go to the concert and try and buy the tickets, and
scalpers nick them all basically
right before them, and he gets into a fight, and that leads into a kind of a melodramatic scene in the middle of it.
Yeah, there's a very, very long sequence where it's like an Ozu film in the middle, just for some, for a extended period of time,
A little
where
too
it's
long.
just yeah, probably a little too long. And there are problems with the second half of this film. One massive one that we'll get to later, but like there's just a very long sequence where it just kind of really lingers on the melodrama and the depression of him in that scene. And that's what I mean about the first half of this film, I think, being a lot stronger than the second. The thing I really like from the second half is that cafe sequence where they kind of pantomime in the kind of make the fake cafe. But other than that, I think this film's pretty front loaded, and it's a real kind of just a joy, an absolute joy to watch the beginning of it. And then it kind of sags, and it does so intentionally, because that joy is kind of a facade, isn't it? It's them trying to put a brave face on how they actually feel about things. And then once something happens, like at the concert where he gets in the fight, that kind of dents that, it then ruins the whole day until they can kind of lift it up later. So it's
Yeah,
kind of
I think though, I think a film still does all of that without this leaden lump of melodrama in the middle of it. Yeah,
I agree.
Do you know what I mean? There is a low key, softer telling of that story without it getting too laden.
I agree.
In the middle.
I agree completely. But something I wanted to say about the production of the film, that plays into some of how some of the nice stuff in the first half certainly, is that when he was making No Regrets for Our Youth, actually was in the middle of making No Regrets for Our Youth, there was a huge strike at Toho. And the studios working out. There's a massive strike, and I think the strike was I think it was an actor's strike or something, but it was a massive strike, and it's one of the reasons lots of No Regrets for Our Youth got rewritten and it got changed, because lots of leftist people got involved at the studio and became quite high up in the studio and started trying to make changes on the movies to make them more left-wing in some ways. And then what happened as a result of the strike was that the star actors at the studio all left the studio, and they did a bit of a Mary Pickford, D.W. Griffiths, Charlie Chaplin. They went and formed their own studio, and they formed a studio called Shin Toho, New Toho. And they went off and formed Shin Toho. And Shin Toho's whole MO, and Kurosawa ends up making a few films for Shin Toho in the next few we're going to watch. There's a few that are with them. But Shin Toho's whole deal was it was about movie stars. And Toho's whole deal was it was about directors after that point, and they were going to put their energy in directors and giving filmmakers a platform. So what happens is when he makes One Wonderful Sunday, he doesn't have any movie stars because all of the movie stars have fucked off to join Shin Toho. And because he doesn't have any movie stars, he was able to shoot on location on the streets of Tokyo because the two people in the film were just basically complete unknowns. And that's how you get these sequences on location of them running through the streets in the rain and, just walking around in Tokyo during the day. And I think that really lends a lot to this movie because those bits are beautiful. I mean, the sequence where they're running in the rain is amazing.
Yeah, and that builds to the thing at the concert hall where the ticket booth is outside, and you've got the awning, and you looking down the stairs, and you can see the rain in the background. It's just so beautifully framed and shot and lit. It's
interesting because when John Ford met Kurosawa, not on the set of Tiger's Tail as we talked last time, but later, years later, when they met properly, he apparently said to Kurosawa something like, "Oh, you're the man that puts rain in his films." Was basically what he said, which sounds dismissive. But Kurosawa's response was, "You've been paying attention," which suggests that Kurosawa thought that was fundamental to his movies. But this is something, you definitely see it here. Like you see this later, like again, Seven Samurai and later films. There's always these kind of scenes of mud and rain and that sort of thing. But I think it's really, really brilliant here. And that whole during that extended black hole in the middle of this film, there are some really nice things about it, like the sound of the rain outside is so evocative, and then there's that really nice diegetic music that comes on where there's like a speaker outside and there's some sort of music being filtered into the street, and he's sitting in there, and you've got like dripping coming in from the ceiling in a pan, and I loved all of that stuff. It goes on too long, but there's some beautiful stuff in there.
What was nice about the one thing I did that for me was a saving grace about that sequence is his admission of worthlessness, of feeling worthless, because it isn't I mean, that is linked to pride and everything, but it isn't. It's not. It's not a prideful aloofness. It is a feeling of failure that is causing this, causing him to sort of his grumpiness is kind of this kind of inability to admit his own failure, and he does that in halfway through the film, and then is able to loosen up a little bit more after that as well, which I did like that. But again, it's just like you say, it's a black hole, and it sequences too long, and it just sits. The rest of the film's got such an energy to it for up till that point that this is just.
It is. I think Steven
Soderbergh. But they get back outside and it picks up again.
It picks up again. I was going to say, like, Steven Soderbergh famously likes to re-edit old films at home, so I'd like to see his cut, just trim
his
some
88-minute cut.
Yeah, that'd be nice. But another thing I wanted to say about the production of this film, more as a placeholder for something that's going to come up at the other end of his career with his last movie, Matadeo, in the mid-90s, is he talks a lot about that most of his biography in the chapter concerning One Wonderful Sunday is about how he co-wrote it with a childhood friend. And there's a childhood friend whose name I haven't written down, I have. Yukasa Kinosuke, who he wrote this with, his mate he grew up with. They had the same teacher, and they had like an inspirational professor that they really loved. And he was talking about how when this film came out, when One Wonderful Sunday came out, their professor got in touch to say how amazed he was that two of his students had made this film, and he cried when he saw their names in the credits. And they end up having dinner with their old professor, and Kurosawa writes about being really struck by how old his professor was now and feeling sad about it. I'm saying this to put a pin in it because Matadeo at the end of his career is basically about that. It's kind of interesting reading about that here, having seen Matadeo. I was like, oh, okay, that's sowing the seeds for something. But yeah, interesting anyway. And another thing I wanted to say about this movie was, well, let's talk about the ending, right? What was your take before I sully it with my take? What was your take on the actual, not the concept thing, because I think that's beautiful, but you know what I mean, the appeal to the audience.
There were two things. I used to love a good fourth wall break. I did used to love a good fourth wall break, and I was happy with them in certain places. Ferris Bueller did them very well, and other things have done them very, very well. He's killed it for me, because simply because after that film came out, I've taught film to sort of 16 to 18-year-olds for a lot of years, and now to undergraduates. Soon as Deadpool came out, it seemed that the only concept that any film student was interested in was the fourth wall, and that Deadpool had invented smashing the fourth wall. So I instantly rub up against any fourth wall breaks now. Just as a reaction, my default is, you've got to earn this now. You've done it.
Yeah.
It's got to be funny. And this seems so far out of place, where all of a sudden she's looking directly at the camera, saying to the audience, there's so many of us, and it's such a downer as well. It's like the sinkhole in the middle. This could be in every couple. Like, we don't need to for a character to turn to the audience and say, there are lots of young couples whose dreams have been crushed by the war. We need you to hope for us. We need you to pray for us. We need you to.
It's interesting you say about how this could be in every couple and that kind of aspect. Because in Kurosawa's autobiography, he admits to fucking this film up with this scene. And talks about how the audiences in Japan didn't clap. Like, he wanted this experiment in people in the audience participating in the film, feeling like they were helping. It's post-war Japan. People are sad. People are poor. Having these people stand up and cheer for these people on screen, and that being this kind of cathartic moment in the cinema. And that didn't happen. He says it happened when it was shown in Paris, but considering he probably wasn't in Paris, I have no idea how true that is.
Yeah, mate. Yeah, no, they loved it. They went mad for it.
They went mad for it there. But he talks quite openly about how he fucked this up, and he says that he pressed for this thing in the film against his mate Yuakusa, the co-writer, and what his co-writer
just to give some context to people who maybe not seen it. So they end up at this outside amphitheater, concert theater, and he suggests that they imagine this concert they weren't able to get into earlier, and he says, right, all of the musicians are invisible, I'll be the conductor, let's listen to it, I'm going to conduct, you listen to it. And kind of he starts to conduct, and the wind noises kind of pick through, and kind of she doesn't quite, this kind of magical kind of moment of romance fails to ignite. So she turns to the camera and appeals to the audience to clap and applaud. He tries it again, and all of a sudden we hear the unfinished symphony, and it's really, really lovely kind of Capra-esque moment to end the film on. But yeah, this bit in the minute. Sorry, I interrupted you there, but you were saying
his co-writer had an idea that is much more in tune with what you're saying about the Everyman. His co-writer didn't like the idea of this plea to the audience. He thought it was shit because it's not very good. And what he wanted to have happen instead was, in the original script, was for couples that looked a lot like them, dressed like them, similar age, whatever, to come into the amphitheater and just kind of start sitting in the seats and to watch the symphony then happen. And the idea was going to be that they were standing in for all the other lonely lovers in Japan, or whatever, the young poor lovers in Japan, or whatever it is she says, and that these people were going to kind of come in who resembled them, and were going to just participate in this symphony, and that the film would end like that. And what I like about that is it's still magical realism, isn't it? It's still a weird, non-realistic thing that would happen in this otherwise quite realist film. But I think it's more subtle and slightly more interesting than what we actually got.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then, there's a little coda at the end where he sees her back on the train and he says, I'll see you next Sunday. But that's essentially the end of the film, isn't it? And I think that's a much stronger place to sort of end it. But also, again, to go back to the Capra thing and the William Wyler thing and what you were saying when I was talking about Prestige Oscar, there is this kind of, there is a tempered hopefulness at the end of it. It's kind of like, it's not George Bailey sitting around the Christmas tree with his family whilst everybody in the town comes and throws money at them and solves their problem. It's them going, yeah, we're still broke. Yeah, we still got shit jobs, but I'll see you next Sunday. So the hope extends a week basically, and they'll keep on bumbling along, and hopefully they'll bumble into the right places. But there isn't that there's no sense of the Americans would chuck in the American dream, and they keep we're all everyone's going to be rich. Hey, we're all going to be millionaires. There's no ending like that. It is just a kind of, what we've had today isn't what we wanted, but it was good, and we'll have it again next week. And
completely. I think that's right. One last thing I want to say about this film is I can't think of any other classic old film by a great director or anything like that where I've said this should be remade. This is waiting to be remade. And I really strongly feel that way about One Wonderful Sunday. Not just when I watched it yesterday, but when I watched it the first time I saw it years ago. It feels like something that, partly because no one's seen it, even when people like Kurosawa films, it's not like one of his major works. It's not like a major popular film. But also because even though it's dealing very directly with post-war Tokyo in some ways, it's their post-war Tokyo circumstances, the poverty that came with that, the degradation of the city, the bomb sites, the black market, and all of that. That's all post-war Tokyo. It's all very specific, but it doesn't feel specific. It feels very universal. It feels like when you could
put any other specifics on
anything into it. because it feels like when, like, I know that I don't want to cheapen it. Obviously, this isn't post-war Japan I'm talking about, but like I remember being a student and having no money in my pocket and walking around the street trying to make the best of a day and find something you could do with your 10 quid, you know, and that sort of thing. That's a very compelling narrative, and I think that. You can put all of the moments of the film within you. I mean, I was joking with you. I sent you a message after I watched it yesterday saying, you know, you could easily do this in austerity, post-Brexit Britain. You could do this film. But I think in any context, you could even use the same elements. Like I think the scene at the zoo is beautiful, and you could put that in any way with different commentary to it and have fun with it. I think the sequence with the cafe and the magical kind of element of that, where they're sort of pretending they've made this cafe and miming it all. I think you could carry that off if you did it well, like in a modern film, and make that very charming. I think a lot of that's going to hang on how charming you find the actors to kind of buy into it. But I really think this film is rife for remaking. I really think this film could be really put anywhere, like you say. What's your take on that? Is that nonsense?
No, I absolutely agree. I think you could, you can take the set pieces and you can, I think if anything, it's possibly even more relevant today with wealth discrepancy and
people feeling like they don't have a place in the world a lot more.
Yeah, and the fact that in real terms, wages have not kept pace with inflation for about 15 years, maybe even more. Like
that whole thing about not being able to afford a home and not being able to pay rent. I mean, that's only gotten worse.
Exactly, so, and the disproportionate effect that COVID has had on young people as well. Affecting their jobs and that kind of thing, and will continue to have. And then you add into that things like the amount of debt people leave university with as well these days. If anything, it feels like, although a young person can have to use the words of James, to paraphrase the words of James Franco in Spring Breakers, can have more shit. Materialistically, we're probably so much more better off than we've ever been, and we can get hold of things cheaply. In terms of wealth, in terms of having a stable home and a job and an income and being able to pay the bills that need paying, I think that's probably much more difficult now than it's been in a long time. So that idea that all you're really wanting is to get together and have a home of your own, it's probably something with a hell of a lot of resonance and could be dressed in very modern clothing.
The other thing as well, and it's the sort of thing I've toyed with trying to write myself at some point, is that I don't know how much the rights are to remaking a film from the 40s and all that kind of thing, but it would be a very low budget movie, because the way you do it here is similar to how they did it then. You're shooting it on the street, you're shooting it with just young people out and about. It's not something that's particularly high octane or anything like that. I think it could even be a very sort of a low budget feature, this. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I just think this is ripe for the remaking. If anyone's listening and they want to remake it, please do so. Yeah, but that's what I'm going to say about that. Let's introduce a new segment to the show that doesn't have a name, because I'm terrible at naming things, but maybe we'll
I thought we'd call it "This is what Pauline Kael died for."
So what we're going to do is we're going to put films.
I thought we were going to go with high and low.
High and low does make sense, doesn't it? High and low. There we go. Let's do that. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's hope all this works, because I'm terrible at stuff like this. So there we go. Share that. Can you see it? You can see it, Craig?
Yeah, I can see it.
Nice. Okay. So this is where we are at the moment. I'll rename Craig Scale. It'll be high and low. Don't worry about that. That's a terrible name. So this is where we are at the moment. We put this through just before we started recording. You've got Tiger's tail down in the bottom here, on the axis of appreciation, going this way, with enjoyment going this way.
This is very similar to the Little White Lies scale that they used to mark their films out of. There was like the anticipation, enjoyment, and way of kind of marking, giving scores to guilty pleasures, but
Yeah,
maintaining their credentials.
exactly. So basically, we've got Tiger's Tail, which you didn't like really or appreciate that much in the bottom. That's kind of the low point at the moment. You got Sanshiro Sagata 2 up on this side here, which is a film you enjoyed a lot, but was pretty shoddy in some ways. Sagata 1, which you appreciated more than enjoyed, and then The Most Beautiful, which you said to me before you wanted that kind of dead middle at the moment.
Pretty much.
Where do you want to put the oh dear, I'm deleting my graph. I'll deal with that later. Where do you want to put the ones you've seen?
I think there's probably only a sheet of paper between them.
Okay.
But one of the things was that you said that we'll put these films together and kind of these first 6 together, and I feel like looking back on it, actually, we probably could have dedicated whole episodes to these 2 films, but
yes, I think
not quite. But for me, this is quite easy and probably less. There's no tension for the viewers here, but they're both sitting at around about sort of, about 80% of the scale on both axes. They're
both sort of up here.
They're both up here, yeah, right along. I think going forward, we'll have to make these. They're probably a little bit further along to the right, actually, even for No Regrets. That's probably a little bit too. There we go. They're about there, yeah. And then
on One Wonderful Sunday, do you enjoy that less?
I thought when I finished watching it that I'd preferred No Regrets of Our Youth, but talking it over, I think One Wonderful Sunday actually, I would say One Wonderful Sunday I enjoy slightly more, and No Regrets of Our Youth I appreciate slightly more.
Okay, so let's do them that way. Okay, let's do that. So yeah, I'll tidy that up, but this is the scale as it currently stands. It's obviously going to have to work on the icons because there's 30 films going on to this.
Yeah, we're going to have to. Yeah, but yeah, this is powered by StreamYard. There's all sorts of AV miracles that we're going to throw your way in the next few episodes.
Yeah, I'll work out how things work. Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's great then. So overall, you enjoyed both of these ones then?
Yeah, no, I really did enjoy both of these films. I thought it's quite a pronounced leap in terms of from what you see in his first 4 films to what you get in these films. And to get a Wilder film and a Capra film, I know we're simplifying that, but that's what I wanted, and that's very much what I got. So I'm very, very happy with that.
What's
next?
Well, next up is 1948's Drunken Angel, which lots of people say Rashomon is sort of where Kurosawa really starts because that's the one that won in Venice and all of that. I've always thought of Drunken Angel because it's the first film of his that stars Toshiro Mifune, and it really kicks off that sort of thing of from this point on, all through his golden period, all of his films are anchored around Toshiro Mifune, basically. And so I always consider it that way. So a bit of homework I'll set you if you have time and if you can find the film. Recently, because I've been watching these films on, and we should probably talk about this actually for people that want to watch along. You mentioned you've been watching on the BFI player. I've been using the Criterion channel, which has most of his films on there. Criterion channel.
Archive.org, if you aren't able to subscribe to anything else as well, it actually has all of these films at the moment as well.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, so there's some ways you can watch them. If you can find this, Craig, on BFI or on archive.org. Recently, Criterion Channel did a retrospective of Toshiro Mifune. And one of the films on there that I'd never seen before that I recently watched was called Snow Trail. And Snow Trail is from 1947, so just before Drunken Angel, kind of contemporaneous with One Wonderful Sunday. It came out slightly later than One Wonderful Sunday. Snow Trail is written by Kurosawa, but directed by somebody else, and it's Toshiro Mifune's first movie. He'd never made a movie before that, and he's the star of it. So it's not essential to watch. It's not counted as one of the 30 Kurosawa films. We're probably not going to talk a lot about Snow Trail in the next episode. But if you can watch Snow Trail, it might give you more context for Toshiro Mifune. You'll have seen his first and his second film ever. And Kurosawa obviously wrote it. And also Snow Trail is a bit of a crowd pleaser. It's about a bunch of people who've basically robbed a load of money hiding out in the mountains. It's quite a kind of cool little film. But yeah,
I'll have a look for it. It's not on BFI Player. The nearest I got was Barnstable Snow, which is 2 minutes of snow in Barnstable in 1979.
Well, watch that instead. That's probably just. Well, anyway, what's your perceptions for Drunken Angel? Because obviously we've been ending with that, haven't we?
Yeah. So I've just lost the the synopsis, which I had read and I had got some ideas, but just to get it back, which is not great here. I'm stalling for time. not quite working. It's the Snow Trail. You've led me down the Snow Trail, and it's taken me away from the Drunken Angel. Here we go. So it says here, part gangster, part melodrama, part social critique, establishing the dynamic relationship that would carry on. Without going into plot specifics, to me, that sounds like Sam Fuller territory. Okay,
that's a really interesting point of reference. Actually, I'm not going to comment on it, but that's a really interesting point of reference. Excellent. It's a film I really like. I won't talk too much about it. Obviously, now I don't want to colour your perceptions of it. But did you know this trivia time? Did you know that Toshiro Mifune was originally George Lucas's pick to play Obi-Wan Kenobi?
I did know that, actually. Yeah. One bit. It's trivia. I did see that also on the BFI Player. They've got the Mifune documentary.
That's a good documentary as well. Yeah,
which I do want to watch, but I'm afraid how much it's going to tell me about the later films. So
yeah, maybe watch at the end. But yeah, that's well worth it as well. I think it's called Mifune: The Last Samurai or something, isn't it?
That's the one.
It's a good documentary. But yeah, I really love Toshiro Mifune. I really love Takashi Shimura, as I've already said, for every single film we've covered, even when he's just playing like some random guy in the background. So I'm looking forward to you seeing the first film with the two of them as sort of the two-hander of it. But yeah, let's tune in again next time and find out what you thought of those.
See you later.
Talk to you later. Bye.